I review so many of these 4x4 crossover type things now that I keep getting them mixed up. If only there was a way that I could remind myself of what this one is. You may remember Romanian automotive powerhouse Dacia for the Nova, or the Supernova, or this one here. But more likely you'll know it as the brand that Renault hoovered up in order to sell Europe's cheapest new cars. Stuff like the Sandero, the hatchback that today has a starting price less than half that of a Mini. And then there's this, the Duster, which starts at a fiver below 10 grand and is therefore the cheapest reasonably sized crossover you can buy new today by absolutely miles. Nissan Qashqai starts at 19. So how does Dacia / Renault do it? Well, the 9995 Duster is called Access, which I think is reference to the fact that it has doors as standard and not much else. Honestly, right, we're talking unpainted black bumpers, steel wheels, tepid air coming out of the blowers, and windy up windows.
Meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Stone Age family.
If you want cold air, you need to go up to Essentials spec, which gives you essentials like, well, windy up windows and steel wheels, except the wheels have been styled a bit. Comfort at 13.5 grand looks more like the sort of car that you would expect in 2019. And then top spec called Prestige, presumably ironically, gets such decadent luxuriousness as keyless entry, climate control, a parking camera, and large alloy wheels. On paper, it looks every bit the fancy car. When you're in here though, you know there's people who dress like tramps and they sort of smell like the inside of an old book, but then you go to their house and it's an actual castle and there's a couple of Rembrandts in the downstairs bog. Well, it's the same sort of principle here. To look at it, you would never guess that it's actually pretty posh. But that's the quality that has endeared the Duster to so many people since it first came here in 2012. You often hear the word utilitarian attached to this thing. A car is utility, a car unconcerned about socio-economic norms and transient trends, and built for someone who wants maximum practicality with minimum fuss and at a very reasonable price. So the second gen Duster here stays very true to that particular shtick. So much so that Dacia's marketing strapline for this car is rugged, robust, and better looking, which is just an amazingly honest and rare piece of marketing. Yeah, it's basically the same, but we've just made it a bit less ugly. And certainly from the driving seat here, it doesn't really feel like a lot of progress has been made. This whole thing looks like an old Renault carcass that they forgot to add any trim to. Now we'll come to the reasons why this can be a brilliant buy, but it's fair to say that in immediate and plain terms, this is about as depressing as crossover cabins come. Everything in here just feels like it was built down to a price, and that's regardless of where in the range you actually buy. And it's not just the old hard hollow plastics thing, you know, which this is of course made out of. It's stuff like the driving position, the wheel doesn't adjust enough and the seat doesn't go far enough back and you feel like you're sat too high and there's no space in the pedal box so your clutch foot's constantly on top of the clutch or right underneath it. So the whole thing just feels awkward. And then dynamically, it's just an absolute wet rag. It's massively roly-poly, so it bounces all over the place. The steering is so light that it just feels unattached to the wheels. The body moves loads on the brakes, so it just never ever feels settled down. It's actually very reminiscent of the way cars used to be set up. Like if you're a bit older, it'll probably remind you of the car that you learned to drive in. In fact, in many ways, it feels like it's come out of the factory with 250,000 miles on the clock. Gear change feels like pulling on a slinky.
Okay.
And if you buy the basic 1.6 petrol, it's a fairly bizarre reminder of what cars used to be like before engineers invented power. Now the stats say that that particular car gets to 62 in 11 seconds, which is respectable, but I don't know where they got that time from, because you could probably run quicker. I drove that one a little while ago and my resounding memory of it is just constantly having to change gear on the motorway, because you could be sat in top gear with your foot flat on the floor and if there was any sort of incline you would just lose speed. All that stuff combined just makes this car quite tiresome quite a lot of the time. Fair to say that I didn't like driving this. In fact, I hated it. Now I know that the professional reviewer in me is supposed to love this because it's so rudimentary and so well priced, but to be honest, the thought of this being my only car for 3 to 5 years, bouncing around and constantly having to change gear, which means constantly dragging your foot from underneath the clutch. It's just a bit... Okay, so now I've got that stuff out, the positive stuff. And there is much, believe it or not. First of all, I should probably roll back a bit on the negativity of the driving impressions, because I do appreciate that there are a lot of people who will appreciate the way this thing goes. Like, its sense of softness will, for a lot of people, be construed as genuine comfort in a very basic and old school sort of way. Actually, going further on that, I think there are a lot of people who will find its obvious lack of sportiness, its obvious lack of firmness, quite refreshing. Plus, in some ways, this is a lot more refined than the last Duster was. Like, there is still quite a lot of wind noise, and it does feel quite slab-sided, so if you're going down the motorway and there's crosswinds, it does get blown about quite a lot. But most of the time it's passable. Like the last Duster, there was just a din quite a lot of the time, and most of that has been eradicated. And a good way to eradicate the problem of the petrol's gutlessness, if that's a word, is to buy the diesel. It just has so much more torque than the petrol that you're not constantly shuffling around the gears. Or for the same sort of reasons, you can buy the turbo petrol. And there's an automatic, so if you want to, you can get rid of the whole gearbox clutch nightmare altogether, creating a lovely bit of space for your left foot. And now we can start talking about the true beauty of the Dacia customer experience. Because beyond the rock-hard plastic and the patchy driving experience is a car with unrivaled space and kit for the money. See, I can show you the boot space, and yeah, it's at the bottom of this list, but it's in the right ballpark, and it is literally less than half the price of most of what's on here. It also has proper rear leg space, making it 10 grand's worth of proper family car, or 13 grand's worth of proper 4x4, if you like. I mean, sure, there are no twin level loading floors or clever retractable covers or nets or anything like that. But let's face it, right? How many of us use that stuff, and how many of us keep a tidy boot? Not a euphemism. And then the engines, like the base petrol, as I said before, is terrible. But the diesel is a lot better, and the turbo petrol even better still, because that engine has the characteristics, the qualities of a diesel, like a big slug of torque right in the middle of the rev range. But it's quieter than the diesel. I liked it. What could be a problem, however, is the cost cutting that gives this a mere 3-star Euro NCAP rating. So if you look at the Euro NCAP report on this, you will see that it gets fairly poor results across the board. But especially egregious is the child safety one. Here's a quote. In the frontal offset test, dummy readings in the 6-year dummy indicated marginal chest protection. But otherwise, protection was good or adequate for both dummies. It's all very well sticking a bit of cheap carpet in the boot, but I do think that the safety thing will be a deal breaker for some. But that is the sort of choice that the Duster forces you to make, unfortunately. Your decision to buy one of these ultimately is quite a cold-headed cost-benefit analysis, because really other crossovers are more spacious, more luxurious, more comfortable, safer, and generally just more pleasant to interact with. But they don't come anywhere near offering the ostensible value of this thing. So I can see why somebody would look at this new in a showroom and be flabbergasted by how cheap it is, and then buy it and be perfectly happy with its abilities as a runabout. And that's fair enough, but for me, personally, nah. I just haven't fallen in love with the whole cheapness of it. So there you go, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Please look at our other reviews, and actually we have just taken delivery of a long-term Dacia Duster which will be running for the next 6 months. So if you go to the Our Cars section of the Honest John website, you'll be able to follow our progress with it there. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, hit the notification bell and leave a comment below. Thanks for your time, see ya! So, how does Dacia/Renault do it? I'm gonna have to take this off. It gives the wrong message for a start.